All right, so we've got up next, let's pin, we've got Jim Gerrish here. Welcome, Jim. Grateful that you're able to be here with us. There we are. Okay, is this everybody that's supposed to be here? I think this is. Hey, why don't we do this? Let's do a quick intro from everybody, first of all. So what this is something that we haven't done before. Where we run the risk here, if we get these men together, we may never be able to rein this thing back in. But that's a risk that I'm willing to take because they're all very intelligent, have had tremendous success in each of their fields, and there's a lot of crossover between what they do. So why don't we do this? Let's start with an intro from Jim, then we'll go Burke, and then Wally, if there's anything that we missed about you that you'd like to share. And then we're going to look at questions in the chat. I've got some questions myself. This is going to be a moderated panel discussion. So Jim, give us an intro. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
I'm Jim Gerrish. I'm currently from Moore, Idaho. I'm going to roll my chair to the side, point behind me, and say, this is what I mostly do now, is I hike on the mountains and I pick up elk horns. I'm calling myself 70% retired. I know those other two guys there are even older than me, and they don't seem to be retiring, but I'm trying to do less work and more play. I've ranched. I was a university professor. I've been a private consultant. I've done this, that, and the other stuff, and that's about me.
Glad to have you on, Jim. Jim's visited our place before. He's been on podcast and a summit or two in the past, and just a privilege to have you part of this group. Let's hear from Burke.
Well, I don't like obituaries very well, so
we'll let you write your own. That's why that's why I didn't introduce you.
I think a lot of people that are on your sign up today probably know that I spent most of my career with what are commonly known as deseret ranches, and grew up on a farm and ranch, or a small ranch in Cokeville, Wyoming. Actually, at the time, we didn't think it was small. We ran about 600 cows, thereabouts, but through an unfortunate division of ranch later on, it became smaller. But anyway, did that, and I retired in 2010, so-called retired. But since then, I've done some writing and some speaking and some consulting. Jim and I have been in the same place a few times. Both these guys have been mentors to me over the years. Still do. I'm trying to back up on the consulting work, probably for two reasons. One is that I'm convinced that some people hire me as a consultant only to brag to their neighbors that they've hired a consultant, because they don't pay very much attention to what I tell them.
Right.
And I see Jim's nodding his head. And now the ones that do pay attention, it's really, really fun to work with them. It's really gratifying, and they make good progress, and it's just a lot of fun. But anyway, because of age and other things, I'm just trying to slow the consulting up. I still enjoy speaking when I get the opportunity, and occasionally I instruct in a short course or something like that, and I enjoy that too. That probably tells my story.
Perfect. Yep. We appreciate that. Wally, anything that we missed that's important to know about you?
One of the about me is that I have ranched on my own in the 80s, and I mean went broker than broke. I don't know how many of you know what happened on April the 16th of 1986. That was a dairy herd buyout, and my inventory value was slashed in half, and the bank examiners are at the bank. You talk about a great day to be alive, whoa, and stuff. And so I went broke, and I had the privilege of going. My wife and I wanted to raise our children on a ranch, and I wanted to move somewhere where you didn't have to bale hay all summer to feed it all winter. And so we got the job on the Kelly Ranch, and the Kelly Ranch was one of the very best ranch jobs there ever has been. It's no longer there. The ranch has been sold. And, but I had the privilege of, when I went there, I wanted to have a continuing education budget to help. People that worked on the Kelly Ranch should move up through the Kelly Ranch and then leave, is what they should do. And so we did that. And the first venture in continuing education is we sent a kid to Graham School to learn how to preg check. And we were running heifers for Colorado beef, and they decided they wanted them checked. So we preg checked 3,000 heifers that spring for $3 a head. So the $500 that it cost to go to Graham School right then was quite well repaid. So needless to say, we were able to go anywhere in the world for education and stuff. And that's where I met Bud Williams, and it was he changed my life. And now what I do is I put animals out with people. I'm trying to mentor them and help them along. And Chip Hines and I talked about his grandma Hines talked about putting an old head on young shoulders, and Chip's passed away now, but that's what I do.
Yep.
I want to jump back in and say something. When we started talking about retiring and these guys being older than me, it occurred to me, Burke and Wally, that I've basically known you guys half of my life now, because I met you both in the very early 1990s. And these are two guys that I learned a tremendous amount from. So.
Yep. You're 40 years old, right, Jim?
I'm a little older than that. I'm not as old as either of those guys, but
well, yeah, you've got a lot of wisdom. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a brief definition of how you would define regenerative. Why don't we go in reverse? Well, I don't know if it's reverse order. We'll start Burke, Wally, and then Jim. How do you define that term?
Well, I probably define it differently than some people because it's being so greenwashed anymore that it's sickening. It's like the word sustainable used to mean something, doesn't mean anything at all anymore. It just is a label that's attached on somebody's pet project. And regenerative is beginning to take on some of that because it's a buzzword, everybody wants to think they're regenerative. If the soil is not improving in a measurable way, and if the land is not producing more, taking out the ebbs and flow of rainfall from year to year, but if the land isn't producing more, it's not regenerative. At least that's the way I look at it. The soil health has to be improving. The productivity of the land has to be improving. Profitability has to be improving, or we're not regenerative.
Love it. Anything to add, Wally? What's your definition?
No, I would completely concur with Burke, exactly what he said. I mean, that's
okay. Jim?
This is one of those topics that whoever was going to go first was going to cover it. Because healthy functional soil is the foundation of everything. That is the first point of regenerative. As you go down this path, though, and you have talked about it many times, I've heard you, Jared, it's also regenerating your inner being. In your case, you would talk about regenerating your soul. I would talk about regenerating my connection to the natural world around me. But where we really broaden this out, and I think it's not an overuse of the word, we also want to regenerate our communities out here in the countryside and all of that. And I sincerely apologize for that. Usually I'm the guy who has taken care of that. Sorry. But there. So that's what regenerative means to me. I do like to extend it out to the communities in which we live.
I do too.
Yep. Oh, this is kind of a big topic, but we're facing what you might call an existential change in not only agriculture, but in all business, whereby baby boomers are retiring, and there's not a clear path of succession for many businesses, and agriculture is probably one of the industries that stands to face the most changes and challenges, and also opportunities as we transition into that. And so I'd love to open that up for some discussion of what are the opportunities, how do we mitigate these opportunities as these individuals retire? How do we incorporate succession plans and make this a transition versus an abrupt cliff?
Can I say something on that?
Please.
I had the privilege of sitting down with Monroe Miller in Mount Hope, Ohio. And Monroe Miller was an Amishman, and we were sitting there visiting with him, and I was asking him what was the most important thing, that you can do. And he said that when you turn 50, start transitioning the farm, in their case, over to the next generation. And the way that was done is the first thing the son bought was the cows, because they create cash flow and they can pay the bills and stuff. And the next thing, since they farmed with horses, you bought the horses, and then you bought the machinery, and lastly, you bought the land. And I've thought a lot about that, and that's, the way you go. Just like somebody says, well, how do you get started ranching? And I said, whatever you do, you keep it very close to the cow, because the cow is what creates cash flow, or the ewe, or whatever you're going to run, and stuff. So you got to keep it close to whatever creates cash flow.
Good. Burke, Jim, any ideas on that transition?
Well, I'll throw out that my favorite book of all the books that Alan Nation wrote was Land, Livestock, and Life. And I think anyone who is getting started in the ranching business, they should have that book. And a lot of older folks should read that book also. But there Alan very much talked down the same path there that Wally just did. The first step is to run somebody else's livestock on somebody else's land. And then it's run your own livestock on somebody else's land. And if you're successful at those levels, then you can think about buying land. The absolutely worst thing for a person who wants to get started in farming and ranching to do is go buy a place. Very often it's the kiss of death.
Yeah. I appreciate that, because so many of us think that land is the restricting factor for us getting started, because there's such a high barrier to entry. And so I like that approach. Burke, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with what two preceding me said. There's a couple of things I would add to that. When I retired back in, when was it, 2010, I sort of had an objective, which I failed at, and that was to marry young managers with investor money, because I could see that these young ranchers would have to be extremely careful to know how to get into ranching from scratch. Now, there's people successfully doing it, but they have to have the right opportunity show up and be careful how they do it. Now, I see some ranchers out there that are looking for these young people, and they don't, in other words, they can retire fairly well without selling their ranch at market price. So they're willing to work with a young go-getter to work them into their business. I know 2 or 3 of those people right now, but they just haven't found the right young people to get connected with. On the other hand, I think, and we've got land prices even higher than, a lot of people are reviewing land, looking at land as a store of wealth. But in addition to that, we've got subsidized rainfall insurance and all kinds of subsidies that are bidding up the price of land. And they make it more and more difficult for a young person even to lease land, but particularly to buy land because of the inflation that, if when rainfall insurance will make your land payment to an established owner, that's a pretty nice advantage to just keep expanding. And I know several families that are doing that. They're buying and leasing all the land they can, getting the subsidized rainfall insurance, and basically making their payments.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a sad thing as far as I'm concerned. Now, on the other hand, though, I think there are opportunities. We're going to see a lot of people retire. And I'm getting to the point, I'm a little worried, do we have enough young people interested in doing it? I hark back to Kit Farrow's statement over and over again. Why would the young people want to come back to the ranch if it's not profitable and enjoyable? And too many of our ranches are not profitable and not enjoyable.
That's correct.
And I think those two have to tie together. If we can make it profitable and enjoyable, I don't understand the mechanism, but there's going to be ways to attract people that want to sell their land to these young people that would like to run them. I just hope there are more young people that want to run those ranches, because I don't think they're going to be instant owners. Cows first, and then I agree with Chip Hines. The only equipment a cowman should have is a wheelbarrow, and that's only if he really loves equipment.
Yeah.
And Jim's book, Kick the Hay Habit. Kick the darn thing,
Mhm.
It's amazing how many people can't regard that as a habit. And in so many places, that's what it is.
Yeah. I never considered that Ag Steward would be a dating service, but I've had a couple of individuals reach out to me and say, hey, we need a successor. We need somebody who is qualified and able to work into not only management, but potentially ownership. And so those opportunities are out there. And I think this warrants further discussion because there is a need. Glenn, I reached out to Glenn specifically. I wasn't able to be on the podcast that he did on our podcast channel, but let's go ahead and hear your question, Glenn.
Yeah. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I pretty much know all of you through reputation. Jim, I know from being in Idaho, of course. But yeah, the issue or the question I really wanted to talk about here was the fact that as we move forward, you get young people to come back to the farm if they think it's going to be profitable. That is a long pole in the tent. They're not going to come back if they're going to work, what their fathers and what they have been told that their grandfathers did, putting in, 15, 16 hours a day, never being able to leave and can't go anywhere and not making any money. So, you've got your three legs of the stool that Alan Savory talks about. And I spent some time with him, and even Alan and I had a real discussion when we were in Africa together about the fact that he didn't even have the one leg, and that was the economic leg. Profitable is one thing, but just even making it economically viable so that you can attract them so they will come back to the farm. And I mean, if you talk to a lot of young people, they love the ideology of being a farmer and having a farm life and raising a family on the farm, especially today with what's going on. But that's never going to happen unless we get so that they have a market and some profit to go out there. So you've got to have not only the same time you're working, and I address this in one of my books, the same time you're working at raising those cows and getting that farm being productive, you got to be working the social side of it with the passing things like the Prime Act, so you can market your food right there in the state and have a place close where you can process it and do all that. We've got to be looking at the long game, not just the short game of, okay, go find somebody. I mean, I've got a 24-year-old son who's a certified grass manager from Holistic Management. And he has no interest in going back to the farm because of the fact that there is no profit there, and it's too hard. We've got to start playing the long game on both sides. We got to look at everything holistically and not just as ranchers or farmers or whatever. We've got to look at, so if you bring everything from a big picture down to the small communities again, those communities have got to go back to where they were many years ago. As Wally was talking about, what would Jesus think if we were doing it that way? Well, Jesus would think these communities used to sustain themselves and everybody used to work together. And we need to kind of look at that as a focus of where we need to go versus playing with the game that we have now, where, yeah, you're a rancher, but you still have to ship all your cows, 6 states away to get them, if you get on the schedule, to then get them processed. So I think that's something we've got to take in as alongside of that whole succession plan, is how do we keep the market and get it back to where it will do what we want it to do and generate profit locally.
Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on Glenn's comment there?
But one
Thank
thing
you, Glenn.
on, profitability, everything has two sides to it. You understand what I'm saying? And, during the Depression, some great ranches were built, and like I said, this comes straight from spending time with Bud, is just be profitable. The only book he ever gave me to read was Art of Contrary Thinking, and it was written in the 40s by a stockbroker, and on how to be on the other side of the business, and it's served me well. I hate to tell you, Burke and Jim Gerrish, every time you say something to me, I'm going to say, well, okay, but what's the other side to this? And, it's just, just how you look at it. And one thing is just, to me, is just to get the mindset to be profitable. Period.
I'm going to agree with that. And I think the three of us right here know how to make ranches profitable. We've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, Wally's right. You got to be profitable, and we know how to be profitable, but there are way too many ranchers that don't know how to be profitable. And it's not that they're not smart. It's just that they've got paradigm lockdown and they're tied into the conventional, and for some reason can't move off of that base. We know how to make them profitable. And if more would just let us help them, they can be profitable. And that starts attracting younger people to the ranches if they can be profitable, because and gosh, the good grazers that I know, it's interesting to talk with them, because everybody, as they think about stepping into that and they think they got to start building some fence, I can tell you what, and I think Jim could verify this, it takes most people longer to get from the house to where they need to build the fence than it takes to build the fence after they get there, once they know how to do it. And the being there, I have a little concern about the virtual fencing that's coming into vogue. First of all, it's too dang expensive right now, but even if it weren't, does it take away the observational ability? Because good grazing management is so observation dependent. People need to be there. But the workload actually goes down not when you got a little knot hole to get through to get kind of started. But once you're started, your cattle aren't scattered all over 70,000 acres. They're there in a few. And you can see them. If they do get out, they didn't get very far before you discovered they were out and you got them back. And, and so you're just managing the next paddock or pasture in front of you, making sure the water's going to be there. The fence is okay when you get there. It simplifies life. And, you can kick your cows per man ratio way high. And cows per man ratio is one of the key drivers of profitability. And
yeah,
so, there's just a lot of things that begin to change as we become more regenerative and manage things better. Why, it becomes easier, it becomes more fun and more profitable.
Just like one thing back to his observation, Walt Davis said, the biggest downfall of ranching was when they changed animal husbandry in college to animal science. And I would completely concur with him on that and stuff. And
Yeah.
his deal, he always drilled into you that biological capital was way more important in the long run than financial capital. And
Yeah, on this topic of profitability, I'd love to hear from each of you. Let's start with Jim. But this was specific towards Burke, but I think each of us could address this maybe from our own perspective. This is from Kirk, I think Kirk Corbridge. What are the 3 indicators you zero in on to determine the problems of unprofitability? So from each of you, I know you've managed places and you consult on places. So when you go, you look and you're saying, hey, are you profitable? What do you look at? Jim, do you want to address that first, and then we'll go to Burke and then Wally?
Okay. In most places in the country that I've worked with, first and foremost, it is feed costs. I mean, profit is income minus costs. And the cost that I see killing most people is winter feed costs. After that, and Burke already alluded to it, is the number of animal units managed per FTE or full-time employee, and then the carrying capacity of the land. Across the country, most pastures that I see are managed at less than 50% of what their actual productive capacity is. Environment sets the upper limit of carrying capacity. Our management determines how much of that potential we capture, and most folks are down here when they should be up there. And it is not understanding the basic plant-soil animal relationship and finances that has people down here rather than up here.
Jim has just said some of it in words that I would almost echo. But I usually use a summary slide. People will see it tomorrow when I talk. But I just say, cut overheads as much as you possibly can. Now, land and people are overheads and we need them, right? So you can't eliminate, but cut overheads as much as possible. You only need what you need. And market well, get excellent herd fertility, and then improve 3 key ratios. And Jim's alluded to all 3 of them. Acres per cow, you want it to diminish. In other words, you want your productivity to go up. And most ranchers are not near at potential. And so acres per cow, cows per FTE, and fed feed versus grazed feed. Every day I can substitute a grazed day for a fed day, if I can say it that way. I've just changed the equation. You know, and I work with some ranches in northern Wyoming where it can snow. On one of those ranches, we've not fed the cows for 3 years. Leave the calves on till they're 10 months old and getting good conception rates. On the other one, and they've snowed up pretty bad a couple of years, but this year snowed really good near Sheridan, Wyoming, and fed 40 days, I think, maybe 50 at the most. And that was our first calf heifers and weaned heifer calves. Now the weaned heifer calves, they came midway through the feeding season, so we didn't have to feed them quite as many days. They were on the other ranch.
Yeah. How about you, Wally? What are the key drivers of
one
profitability?
thing that since I put animals out with people, and my goal is to just, blend in with the, whatever they do. I don't care, if we're running cows, I don't care what you breed the cows to. You understand what I'm saying? I just want to be profitable, and we're scaling your business, trying to cut the overheads. But everybody that I work with about has way too many overheads. And you got to understand that overheads not only take money, but they take your time. Because when I'm visiting with these people about doing stuff, they're usually driving to town to get a flat tire fixed or a hydraulic hose or something, and so overheads you know, just are horrendous in my, you know, my opinion, you know, and that's just, and, you know, when if they talk about destocking in a drought, you know, all that does is stop your direct costs pretty much. The overheads go on. So you got to be very, you know, that's why Burke just hammers on, you know, overheads, get them down so you can survive the tough times.
Mm-hmm. As we are in this inflationary period, are there any things that we need to adopt, any changes that maybe those of us from a younger generation may not be aware of, where you guys have lived through? I think all of you were, well, you all were alive during the 80s. I wasn't alive, and I mean, I was alive, but I don't remember the, you know, 20% in interest expenses and things like that. So for those of us, can we glean a little bit of wisdom from you guys that would help us as we navigate some uncharted territory?
I will start out there, since I very much lived through the 80s. I mean, it was very humbling to you know, when you go broke, it was, you know, the hardest thing, and it's still in my mind, that when we left the place we had in Kansas and moved to the Kelly Ranch, I remember to this day following my wife out the driveway, and she had worked very hard for 10 years, and we basically left without nothing, you know. And during that time, you know, not all the families made it through that time. Not all the people made it through that time. So, you know, and what you need to be aware of is just understand what it takes to be profitable and do it. You know, it can be, you know, you know, after you learn how to do it, it's fun, it's easy. Like Burke and Jim said, it's not that hard. I know my brother-in-law did a study back in the 90s, and the grazing has advanced more, and it's just amazing how much less time it took under the systems, and how much better the animal performance was and everything, you know, and stuff. But you know, the you know, you just need to learn how to be profitable. And I grew up with an old rancher, and Mr. Burtis, the way he was profitable, he just didn't spend money, period. You know, that's just the way we did stuff.
Cool. Jim, Burke, what are your thoughts about this time? I will start with Jim and then go to Burke.
A lot of people hate accounting. They hate crunching numbers. I am known throughout this industry as a numbers cruncher. And as a matter of fact, when I'm on the program at 4, I'm going to talk about crunching numbers. I'm not talking about grazing management. I'm not talking about regenerative soil health or anything. I'm talking about how important it is to crunch numbers. If you are not willing to pay attention to the accounting, to understand basic business principles, you will not be successful in ranching.
Yep. Amen. Burke?
Well, I'm there with Jim. You gotta have the numbers. I think because of computerization, too many of us have become data nerds, and we collect way more than we need. And as a result, we never turn that data into information that can help us make a better decision going forward. But there are key pieces of information that we absolutely need and must track. And we just have to get used to that. And I'll talk a little more about that tomorrow. But and financially, I love the way Ranch for Profit goes about that. I just think they look at it right and can help us take numbers and really analyze our business and where it's going and what we can effectively change to make our business better. And you know, that's what we need to know. Our information needs to help us make better decisions going forward. And
I will second Burke on, you know, if you haven't been to Ranching for Profit School, my God, go. And you need to plan on going twice, because the first round, you're just going to gather up a quarter to half of it. And also the people that you meet there and stuff. And I will give you an example. One reason is I'm successful at ranching is I went to Ranching for Profit School in '88. I've been to 5 of them, I think, or more. I don't know. But I met one person there, and I was on an executive link board with him. His name's Walter Lynn. And he is one of the very best agricultural accountants that's walking the face of the earth. And I have got the numbers, Walter Lynn. I mean, we have the terrible Decembers every year because I like to trade cattle and I really don't like to keep track of stuff real close. And he is very anal about his numbers, and December is not a good time for me and stuff. But I have got the numbers. I know what, and it's because of him and the Ranching for Profit that I know my business.
Yeah, appreciate that. Can we talk on the subject of profitability? We're kind of gearing more towards the cow-calf side. There was a comment in the chat about that, but maybe that's because, of our context and our background, but we could equally be talking about pastured pigs, or we could be talking about poultry. Can you share a little bit about, on that subject, determining appropriate enterprise mix for your operation and how you recommend going about that, including sell by marketing is kind of the new rage, right? Everybody thinks they can capture more market share if they market direct to consumer, which is great, but you still need to know your numbers back to that point. So I guess to boil the question down, it would be, is it right to diversify, and how do you know if that enterprise is actually going to be adding or a distraction or detractive from your business? And maybe Jim, I think it's probably your turn to speak on that one first, and then we'll go Burke and Wally.
Okay, a lot of my consulting business over the last 20 years has been working with individual producers in the area of enterprise selection based on the set of resources you have to work with and the what you are willing to do. And in the presentation that I'm going to be doing a little bit later, I'm actually going to have a listing on a return per AUD harvested by different classes of livestock, where the highest return is down to where the lowest return is. And so, yes, to me, diversification to other livestock enterprises is a good thing. And it's probably even more advantage the closer you are. If you are direct marketing to a consumer and you have 4 different types of meat that you can offer them at your on-farm store or from your website, that attracts a lot of people. If you just have one type of meat that you are marketing, yeah, it might be excellent, wonderful, the very best, grass-fed steak that there is, but there's money being left on the table because you're not presenting your customers with other opportunities. I will also talk about the greater the value of your product, the more you can invest in creating that product. Okay.
Good. All right. That's a good segue into your next segment. Appreciate that. Burke, what are your thoughts on diversification?
Well, I think first, before diversification, I'd say the selection of enterprise choice and selection is really, really important. If you need to be profitable, and I hope everybody wants to be profitable. I think it's unfair competition for people to subsidize out of their household income or their business income a farmer or a ranch and put product on the market at a below cost. It's unfair to those people who are making their livelihood out of it. But I think enterprise choice, enterprise selection is really important. Then diversification. Oh, and I think you need to pick your own endpoint. Some people direct market, and I really get intrigued with that, but I'm not the guy to do that.
Correct.
And I think we need to determine where do we best fit. I can tell you this: at our endpoint, we need to be able to price our product at a price that is enticing to our customer and profitable to us. We can't do that, we're in trouble. Now, as far as diversification, there's no question, if you can stack enterprises successfully, you can make more money. However, we've got to be careful. do I have the expertise or can I hire the expertise? And remember, if I hire it, it's another overhead to run that second operation successfully. In other words, if I want to add sheep to cows, I think it's been pretty well proven that you can add a ewe for every mama cow and never miss a cow feed. And yet have that revenue. Question is, can you spread yourself far enough to take care of that, or can you hire the people to take care of that at a cost that's less than the added revenue would be? And I
Well
think
said.
a lot of times the answer to that question is yes, but it takes some thought and expertise and planning to get from here to there for most people.
Yep. Amen. Well said. Wally, what are your thoughts on?
Well, on diversification, where I grew up with Willard Olson, and by golly, he loved to do just about everything. We had sheep, hogs, cattle. We had 4 milk cows, and on and on and on. We had 116 tires, and let me tell you what, diversification to that scale is not good. You know, you need to have your core businesses and you know, understand what they are. You know, and just like sheep, I love sheep. I'm back in the sheep business, and the reason is you incorporate the sheep, and basically they cost you nothing, and they save expenses because they clean up the weeds, and they utilize something that, you know, a lot of people spend a lot of money on. And so I like diversification, but you just need to be understand it. And my philosophy is, you know, before you get big, you need to be good, and then you get big. And
Yep. I think that covered it really well. Thanks, gentlemen, for answering those questions. And bottom line is, you know, with our clients at Ag Steward, we encourage them to do, and we'll help them walk through an enterprise budget. We can see, okay, is this going to be profitable? Don't just go off gut feel. Let's put some numbers to it. And specifically on direct marketing, we encourage them to go and to market the product first. I think this is kind of what Joel Salatin teaches. See if there's a market out there. See if they're willing to pay what your production costs are. And people will kind of freak out and say, well, but I don't have a product yet. And I said, well, isn't that great? If they're demanding it, then you know, hey, I can produce that. Because production is rarely the weak link for us. We are producers. The marketing is where we really have the steepest learning curve. But all right, I'd love to shift a little bit towards leadership. I consider all of you guys great leaders. And with that, I'd love to hear from Burke. When within your tenure at Deseret Ranch, how did you show up for your people as a leader? And how did you help and inspire them to develop leadership skills so that they could progress? And
You know what? This is a 2-hour short course you're asking for here. Let me try to summarize it a little bit briefly. First of all, I gave a series of talks one time, and then people started coming to our ranches, and this was back in Nebraska years ago, with groups that toured the ranch, see what we did. And I would take them to a herd of cows, and I would say, okay, John's the foreman here. Please ask him your questions. Well, they'd always look at me and ask me the question, and I'd look at John. John, can you answer that question? And John could. We'd go to the next herd and say, okay, this is Aaron. He's the guy responsible for this herd. You can ask him your questions. Well, they'd ask me again, Aaron, can you answer that question? And Aaron could. We'd go on to the third and the fourth, and finally they would start asking the herdsman the questions directly, but it took a while. But at the conclusion of those, and it happened almost every time we had off-ranch visitors come to the ranch, they say, where did you get a bunch of people empowered like that? And I said, you know, I don't think we're intellectually any more gifted than a lot of other people out there. But I said, we have made a conscientious effort to have a shared vision amongst all of us. you know, that we all buy into the same thing. We maybe not 100% agreement, but close enough that everybody can buy into that vision and move toward those endpoints. And each person had their herd. It was his herd. And he knew it was his herd. He knew he could claim all the good things there were to claim about the success of that herd. And he also knew he had to eat the things that didn't work quite so well. They also knew we were in the game together. We had guidelines. If they wanted to stray out of guidelines, we would discuss it as a group and say, yeah, that might be worth a try. Why don't you try that? And it was usually based on a feed input of one kind or another, supplement or whatever else, levels of protein to feed or something like that. But sometimes other things. And then on those things, because we talked about it in a group, whether we had buy-in. But I think you have to recognize, if you were to ask a question of a bunch of college graduates and say, how many of you want to fail now that you've graduated from college? Well, you know the answer to that. How many of you want to succeed? Everyone would like to succeed. And they know the difference. They know the difference between them being successful or being a robotic extension of the boss. And so I try to work along, and naturally training is a very important part of our work. If we can't be effective teachers and trainers, we're going to flunk as managers. If we have very many people with us, we've got to know how to train and teach, because you can't expect them to manage at a level that's way up here when they've only seen something way down here. You know, so you've got to teach and train and help them understand. But as they grab, I say, I can't empower anybody. I used to be invited to speak on how do I empower my people, and I'd accept the topic, and then I'd say, I've been asked to talk on how do I empower my people, and I don't. They have to empower themselves. That's a personal thing. But I can, as a manager, I can encourage, facilitate, and reward. And the reward is granting more autonomy. And the granting of more autonomy, if people are properly paid to begin with, that's more motivating than more salary. They want to have their piece of this ranch is theirs, and they like that. They want to do that. And so the quicker I can help those people become self-supervising, they're going to do better work, and it frees up more of my time to be involved in managerial issues.
Yeah, I like that. Jim,
that's kind of a quick summary, but that's kind of the way I like to approach it.
Yeah, I like that. Jim, what about you as far as specifically the role of a leader within the business and empowering others? What are your thoughts?
A couple things that I would say. When at a lot of our workshops, I tell people, write the position description of a cow. What is the cow's job to do? And we go through this. And then I said, okay, if the cow is doing all of these things, what is the role of a manager? And to me, the role of a manager is to create a working environment where your employees can thrive. So if I think about the cows as being ranch employees, I want to set up the ranch to where that cow can do her job and excel. Then I would go to what Burke said is, you let people empower themselves, but within guidelines of the institution. As far as being a leader, for most of my life, starting with when I first met my wife, I have been accused of being arrogant. And usually that arrogant is an adjective to some other word, which you asked for a G-rated presentation, so I can't say those other things. But I tell people, never mistake self-confidence with arrogance, or never confuse self-confidence with arrogance. When I started at the University of Missouri, I was part of a research committee. And just all due respect to the other individuals on that committee, I just didn't see a lot of people stepping up to a leadership role to say, this is what we can do at this facility. These are the type of questions we should be addressing. So even though I was the most junior faculty member on there, I just stepped up and did it. because no one else was doing it. And I think that's a huge part of leadership, more so in community and life than necessarily within a business. But at some point, somebody's got to step up and make a difference. And that's what leadership is, stepping up and making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me add one thing to that. Can I add one thing to that?
Okay.
I hope so.
Yep. Let's hear it. We opened a can of worms here.
This comes from a textbook I read long ago. And I can't attribute to the right person. But there was one chapter, it was management text, but there was one chapter on leadership. The guy got to the end of the chapter and says, man, I haven't defined leadership very well. And he said, I'm not sure I know a definition for leadership. But he said, I can tell you this, it's best gauged by the voluntary response of those being led. Circle the word voluntary, by the voluntary response of those being led. And I have added to that, if it's not voluntary, it's not leadership. It's pushership or coercion or something else. And so to have voluntary response, you've got to provide a good motive, something that people want to come to, want to be part of, and want to follow you into.
I like that. I'm writing that down. Wally, specifically for you, on this leadership topic, can we transition a little bit into building teams and how good leaders are able to build teams that support them? And
I would love to do that, because to be right honest with you, what I'm working on right now is Wallace Olson Ranch LLC. Wallace Olson's going to start fading into the past. And what I'm saying there is I'm bringing on young people to be, in theory, general managers or whatever you want to of Olson Ranch LLC, because I want to have lots of my retirement income coming from agriculture, because it's very profitable to me. And so that's what we're doing now. I've got 3 young people that I work with now, and what we're doing is Walter Lynn and John Haskell. We're working on developing, Olson Ranch LLC's, we got a mission statement and everything, but trying to work to put these 3 gentlemen together, 3 families. This is not just for the 3 gentlemen, this is for the families. So they've got a support group and everything, and they've got their own individual operations, but I'm involved in all of them. And like I said, it's kind of complicated, but it's exciting me to see where this all comes out. And we're just in the infancy of doing this. And I'll probably have to apologize quite a bit to these 3, but they seem to be pretty good, and we're going to go forward.
Good for you. Good for you. Way to do that. My favorite quote, I think it was by Peter Drucker, and that is on leadership and management, is you lead people, you manage things. Too often we try to manage people, and it is that force. It's the coercion. I liked what Burke said. It needs to be voluntary. Yeah. We need to set them up to succeed in a way that allows them to express their gifts and talents. One of the tools is a bit of to add to what's been said, is we've found it really helpful with ourselves and our management team on our ranch, and also the clients that we consult with, to incorporate a couple of personality assessments. One of them is the working genius, and one is the Kolbe, Kolbe. And we integrate that actually using AI to help to define who best fits in specific roles. And a lot of times the frustrations that come are because we're trying to force a position on somebody who is not necessarily geared to do that. Some people are more hands-on, some people are more cerebral, some people are balanced. And so those have been good tools for us in the management and leadership. Yeah, Kolbe is that one. It's not an acronym. It's just named after Kathy Kolbe, who founded that. You have to pay for both of those, but it's a really good investment. And that's part of what we do when we work with individuals and with teams. What is the role of technology in agriculture? And is there any technology that you guys endorse that you find to be very helpful when it comes to management or leadership or within agriculture at all? And this can open it up for anybody.
One thing I would say on technology is you need to be very, very careful with that, because one thing we're lacking, and this is in animal agriculture, is the feel in the eye of what's going on out there, the observation of what's going on out there. Every time, the biggest killer of calves is we went to feed trucks with sirens and so you just blowing the siren and not taking care of the animal and the ability to see and feel and know what's going on out there. To me, that's one of the biggest losses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, technology.
Rely on technology.
Yeah, they say that within 5 years we will see more changes and more advancement in the next 5 years than we've seen in all the history of mankind with the rollout of AI and things. I don't see that as a threat with us in agriculture because of what Wally said. I don't think robots or AI or any technology will replace the feel, will replace stewardship, but they can add to it. But Jim, I know you endorse a software, and would you like to talk about that or anything else that you feel is a good tool?
Presume you're referring to Maya Grazing as a grazing management tool. It is a tool that can help you make better management decisions because it does take it data and turn it into information. Okay. But jumping back to AI, I'm a Luddite. I put AI into the 3 worst ideas that humanity has ever had. I think it'll be used for way more evil and nefarious things than it will ever be used for good. But at the operational level of a ranch, well, Wally was saying, and I think Burke referred to it earlier, you take away the human observation, and AI is only as good as the data upon which it is based, what is fed into it. And I think as humans, our observational skill of biological systems is still going to be superior to what AI can do for us. I mean, it might give us an answer in 3 seconds, but a big deal if it's the wrong answer. Almost everything that I look at is they are tools. They are not answers to all of our needs and problems. The virtual fencing, like if me grazing the center pivots, I'd never do virtual fencing for that because I want to go see what's happening because it happens so fast. But on public lands grazing, where the ranch we moved off of, in 23, it had 160,000 acres of public land grazing permits. The fences completely falling apart out there. Forest Service is never going to replace those. And so as a tool to manage those large landscapes where animals are going out and being, 3 weeks, they're going to be here, and we're not worried about the dynamics of the plant community changing in just that moment. I think virtual fencing has great potential for improving management on public lands and on large privately owned rangeland. But for the level of management intensity that we do in a productive environment, I don't see a lot of value for virtual fence there. So it's a good tool in one situation, but I don't think it's a good tool in a different situation.
Yeah.
I love drones though, just to take pictures, record stuff, be observational. And there's, you get a big enough drone, you can do overseeding with it. You can do this, you can do that. I think drones are cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Burke? Role of technology and management and.
I'm probably kind of where these guys are. I worry that it's become such a buzz thing and that people don't feel like they're quite with it unless they're adopting technology pretty rapidly. And I think we've got to be very selective in what technologies we use, we select. There are some of them are going to be great and are great. You know, if I can let the drone check stock water for me once in a while, that's pretty cool deal. I don't
Yeah.
have to get out there and drive that far or whatever. If I can let it check where the cows are and maybe I've got some fencing or whatever else and make sure they're all where they belong. I want to go there and observe fairly frequently, but it sure is nice to have some of that available. Some of the fencing technology, boy, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's made it so much easier to put up a lot of fence quickly. And they're just things like that intrigue me and I think have a payback. But I just think we've got to be real cautious that we're not just buying it because it's technology.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That we buy it because it has a bona fide, verifiable purpose that can make our operations work better.
Agreed. Well said. I appreciate that from your generation. I asked this question of Bud Williams when he came and spent a day with us. He and Eunice did a stockmanship class in the area, and on his way back to Texas, they stopped and spent most of the day with us on the ranch. And I asked him what has technology done for agriculture, and he says, "Well, it pretty well screwed it up." You know how Bud was; he's pretty direct, so to that, maybe the other side of the coin, Wally, is I have those recordings from Bud now, and I'm actually going to utilize technology to help me edit them and restore them. And with Eunice's blessing, post those on our podcast because I want those teachings to be immortal. I want Bud's legacy to live on. So technology is only as good as the person whose hands it is in. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It can be a great tool. It can be a great distraction, just like a gun can be used to provide food for your family or commit homicide. So it's a tool. Depends on how we use it. All right, let's. That was good. I appreciate. Hope that wasn't a sidetrack for anybody, but it's something that is new and it's buzzy here in agriculture, and so.
Well, you talk about technology, Olson Ranch LLC, the overheads is, I've got a 2014 Dodge pickup, and I've got 3 computers, and I think that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And the only employee I have is I shouldn't say consult, but I have an IT guy because I'm not smart enough to run them. So, it's interesting how my life has changed.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just let this self-direct itself a little bit here. What questions do you guys have for each other? What things do you feel like need to be brought up that maybe are not part of your presentation, but should be incorporated into this event?
Well, one thing I see is agriculture has been, just beat down, and also it is, like Walt Davis used to tell me, what agriculture, or ranching, he's into ranching, is, should be the the most fun and the greenest business you could be in. I mean, all it is rainfall, sunshine, and management, and we've turned it into this hellhole. When you calve in January and February in Montana and raise 800-pound calves to sell in November that nobody wants, and on and on and on. We just need to, you need to, and also just lots of people, the belief that you cannot be profitable, and you can be very profitable, and that's the thing you got to change. That's what I work on, working with people is, we need to be, we are going, we don't need to be, we're going to be profitable. And it's really pretty easy to do as long as you learn how to do it. And you know, before you can do anything else, you've got to be profitable. I mean, you know, that's just, I don't care if you want to get into genetics. I mean, all the bits and, you know, Burke talks, I listened to him on Clay Connery's podcast, you know, putting all the little pieces together, you know, but you got to be profitable to put those, you know, putting the pieces together and everything, but you still, profitability's got to be the number one thing to be focused on, I think.
And hence the name, the Profitable Regeneration Summit. That's why we put it first on this. Regeneration is the buzzword, but we must be profitable first. Otherwise, we can't be regenerative. Jim, what are your thoughts? What do these people need to hear that may not be part of your formal presentation or our discussions so far?
It wasn't part. It's not part of my formal presentation today, but I think when I was on this webinar before, either last year or the year before, when I talked about, I'm pretty sure I talked about 7 things I've learned over the first 45 years. And the first one is that ranching is a land-based business and the livestock are just incidental. And we love the livestock. It's an important part of this business. But, you know, when I look at where ranches have their money invested, I typically see 5 to 6 times the investment in land-based assets than in the livestock itself. And so if 80 to 85% of your investment is in the land, we need to be much more concerned about the output, the productivity, the performance we get from the land than from an individual animal. And I think for a lot of ranchers, their obsession with getting the highest individual animal performance possible is one of the big impediments to their potential profitability. I mean, 2 things that in the last year's time, well, it's a little over 2 years now, that young men in management positions on ranches said to me. So the first one was when a guy said pounds equals profit. That absolutely is not true. This guy at that time, he was 29 years old, a graduate of University of Idaho with a degree in animal science and a minor in ag business. And prefaced in that conversation was when he said, ranching's never going to be anything more than a hand-to-mouth existence. And I said, you know, 20%, 15 to 20% of the ranches in this country consistently run double-digit return on investment. 15 to 20 lose that equity every year. The 60, 70% in the middle are those break-even businesses that so many of us, you know. But college educated, should know better, managing a very large ranch, he had those 2 notions, that it's a hand-to-mouth existence and that pounds equals profit. The other one was, I was trying to convince a ranch owner and manager that weaning weight wasn't their driver of profitability. And the owner kept coming back to, but we don't want to give up weaning weight. And I kept trying to say, but that doesn't matter. When you're losing $500,000, it's because you're feeding 1,000 cows for 180 days of the year. That's what's killing you. It isn't that you need to get to a 600-pound weaning weight from the 570 where you are right now. And people just don't understand what actually drives profit in this business.
Yeah. So you got an opinion about that, Jim.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Besides being accused of being arrogant, I've also been accused of being opinionated. But like Kit Farrow says, I might not always be right, but I'm never in doubt.
I like it. What about you, Burke? What do these people need to hear
Well, I'll tell you
Well
what,
said.
what they just heard from Jim, I hope everybody paid attention to because it's spot on. And I just say, and this is a little preface for stuff I'm doing to tomorrow, but I don't have time to do it well tomorrow, so I want to just give a prelude or a preface. You know, when I was a kid, and that's too many years ago, but you could buy a pretty good hayfield tractor for about $2,500. You
Hmm.
could put gas in it for 25 cents a gallon, and families were larger, and so your workforce came from the family. Unpaid family labor, sometimes well, in my case, they paid us, but they didn't, they paid us kind of the going rate too, but it wasn't very much in those days. So it wasn't a killer for us to feed hay.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad and granddad, they wanted to be low input and they did better. Most of the ranches in our country, they quit feeding hay about the same time they started to irrigate to grow the next hay crop and then to put up hay. And about the time they finished putting up hay, they started feeding again. And it was crazy. We shortened that up by a couple of months at least on our place, but still, we've got to recognize where we came from. And so from then till now, even given today's prices, the value of our product has gone up a little slower than the consumer price index. And the cost of fossil fuel and iron, if I can lump the things together related to, has gone up faster than the consumer price index. That probably is going to continue and it is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have no choice rather than to try to perfect or make a little better a system that's highly dependent on fossil fuel and iron. We've got to make a system that's much more highly dependent on soil, sunlight, rainfall, and our ingenuity. And how do we combine those? And that takes a pretty good mind shift.
Yeah.
I think we all can be guilty of paradigm lockdown.
Yeah.
I remember a guy telling me once that he had, every time he talked to me, he have to go home and tell his wife how out of the box I was. And he said, now last night I had to go back and tell her he's not just a little bit out of the box, he's way out of the box. And I said, my biggest concern is that I'm just building myself another box.
That's right.
Yep.
Paradigm lockdown it's a big deal, and we've got to make sure we keep our minds open all the time. And we got to watch the neighbor who seems to be doing something that looks pretty good, go investigate, learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd
Yeah.
like
Go for it, Jim.
I'd like to interject since Burke mentioned consumer price index, and I do this in a lot of my presentations. In terms of inflation adjusted dollars, real dollars, consumer price index, the highest beef price we've ever had in the United States was the 1973 peak of the cattle cycle. If we look at these record high prices that we have today, $212 for fed cattle, that is 55% value of what those cattle were worth in 1973. That's what we're up against.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah. Good input, you guys. I get asked this question often. I'm sure you guys probably do too, but how do you get started? How do you get started ranching? And I think we've talked about the limitation of land, and we've kind of overcome that we don't have to own the land to get started. What would be your recommendation for whether it be a young person or a retired person that just wants to do this?
I'll give you Bud Williams' answer, and that's just start. That, just figure out what you can do and start. I mean, you need to go buy a cow or whatever you need to do,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm not real big on doing a lot of great planning. I believe in let's start and then we'll figure out how to do it, because that's the only way you can do it, because there's so many variables in this business. And stay close to the cow, stay close to whatever is creating the cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
is my biggest deal is you can rent, you can and hire and a lot of stuff cheaper than you can own it.
Yeah. Do you, Jim and Burke, well, Jim first, can a guy get started and build a ranch that replaces their off-farm income, start from scratch?
There are people who are doing that. Now, I see Aaliyah's comment in the chat of find a rancher and volunteer, right? That is a way to, get some hands-on experience if you don't have any of that. So that is an entry point, a starting point. And you might find you absolutely don't want to do this as your life work. But if you find you do and you work with that person, there might be an opportunity right there to grow into a business. Now, it's already been pointed out that one way to start is running somebody else's cattle on somebody else's property. To do that, you have to have the management skill so that whoever owns those cattle and whoever owns that land has confidence that you will not wreck their place. So you got to have that, and that's why you need to have some experience. Another way you get started in this business is you raise 20 broilers in the backyard. And then you do a half a dozen lambs. Then you do a few steers, and you are direct marketing and selling that. And maybe you're on the edge of town and you get 3 acres here, 6 acres there, 4 acres there, but you start creating a high value product. And if you are treating people's land right while you're doing that, there'll be more people willing to let you do that. The cash flow inflow can be very good with those food products, and you can grow out from there. So yeah, there are ways to get started in the business, but it is to have a good town job and just dump all your money into a more conventional type farming or ranching operation, that'll never get you anywhere.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. There's a really good podcast from 2 ranchers that I know and admire, and I've actually done business with both of them, and they are both ranching at scale. If anybody's interested, they can message me and I can find the link, but it's on our podcast channel. I think it's one about ranching from scratch. Burke, what would you recommend for somebody young or old that wants to do this? They get the regenerative bug and they're like, hey, I want to do this, and not just for a hobby that we subsidize, but for a business.
Well, I think the alternatives already mentioned are possible startup ways. I think, however, young people, if they really want to do this, I think there's going to be a tremendous separation between land ownership and land management, just because of the price of land.
Yeah.
And because of the age of the farmers and ranchers in America. And I look at my own career and I compare that, and I always ask the what if. Well, what if I'd have been the one that had gone back to the family ranch? I seriously doubt that it would have provided me with the opportunities for self-fulfillment and gratification that working for a company offered me. I had a lot of autonomy. I was able to go out and learn, go to schools and short courses and meet other people. And when I thought I saw somebody that was using a pretty good idea, I'd go visit their place, and then we'd come home and implement, and we'd learn from each other in a group setting situation. And I've got to tell you, I didn't have to work very many days of my life. It was too much fun to call it work.
Mm-hmm.
And and I did it on somebody's payroll. It wasn't mine, but it was pretty darn close to mine for a good number of years until I retired. I'll have to admit it was a little hard to step away from it. because it had been so much like mine.
Yeah.
But, still a very fulfilling career. And I think there's room in there for that.
Yeah.
Now, mid-career, if I'd have wanted to walk away and start over again on my own, that would have probably been difficult.
Yep.
And to do that on a part-time basis, I would have had to call it a conflict of interest. I think how do I devote myself to this while trying to start that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will
Good-
concur
good
with
answer.
Burke. The greatest thing that ever happened to me was going broke in the 80s. Seriously, as tough as it was to go through it, and I don't wish that on anybody, but I would have never, I promise you, I wouldn't be here today, just because I'd still be in Oldsburg, Kansas, probably having a good life and everything, but the things that I've got to experience by going to work for the Kelly Ranch is, Now, granted, I'm with Burke. The day we retired and we drove down the driveway, we knew that there'd be a day we were going to drive out of the driveway, and we did the best we could for the Flint family, and we just left. And I promise you, you probably don't want to. I don't know about Burke, but you don't want to go back. It's just when you leave, and because that a lot of things have changed at the ranch.
Yep. Hey, Lane, I saw you. Did you have your hand up earlier? Did you have a question for these gentlemen?
I did, but you're so far past what we were talking about. I think when I raised my hand, you guys were talking about profitability and marketing stuff. And my operation is mostly farmland. It's dryland, farmland, and Texas Panhandle. We raise bucking horses and stocker calves on top of wheat and milo. And one of my biggest frustrations from the farming side, which you guys are all mostly talking about the ranching stuff, but one of my biggest frustrations is when you talk about trying to find different things that can be profitable, is that the commodities that we're allowed to, I say allowed for a reason, to the commodities that we're allowed to grow and market are extremely limited. And when you try, there are a lot of different opportunities that you can do, especially in a regenerative system, where you could go to different crops like sesame or canola or something like that have multiple uses. There's no market. There's no place to go with those things. And cattle are across the board. You've got a lot of different ways you can market them, but with the grains, unless you've got an elevator or somebody to haul them somewhere or long distance, there's nothing to do. And so I guess my question is, how would you guys recommend that a person go about working with local co-ops and communities and whatever else in order to be able to diversify and open a new market for things that we can grow, because we're not effectively utilizing the land for what it can produce. And a lot of that is based on the industrial farming mindset that we're going to be a factory and we're going to make these things, and that's what's convenient for the corporate folk. Because we got to be honest, these co-ops and stuff are just big corporations, and in some ways, especially on the grains, we're more or less corporate contractors more than we're individual producers. So how do we work with those guys to open new markets or be open to new ideas as we're trying to utilize the land for what it can really produce and be good stewards?
Appreciate that, Lane. Good question. Anybody want to tackle that one? As far as marketing, maybe some what could be like our alternative type products.
Well, I don't think I know the answer to your questions because I have not dealt with what you're dealing with. But our soil health academies can be helpful in that. And we have consultants that are pretty much crop oriented, crop based. And sometimes with and sometimes without the integration of livestock onto those croplands. But they're seeing a tremendous amount of success. And so if you want to Google us or get in touch, Understanding Ag or Soil Health Academy, I think we can provide some answers to those questions, or at least get you started down that road.
Yeah, that's where my thought went as well. I know some of the folks that we consult with also work with Understanding Ag, and once you have their regenerative certification, part of that is to help market the products that you raise. Not always do they have a market, but that's the goal, is they'll continue to invest into that, right, Burke, so that you're able to not just sell at commodity prices, but actually get a premium in some cases for having that regenerative label.
Right.
Glenn Holloway's comment in the chat, I think it's very on point here, and I'll follow up on it a little bit. It says, this goes back to the need as we move forward to also move as local as possible and generate those cottage industry, local processors, he says, et cetera. And then invest in the development of a local mill if possible. There's a presentation that I first gave probably 20 years ago, and I only have given it one time since. And I think it was called Building Communities from the Grassroots up. And it was about taking, all right, so we have grass-fed beef. Well, the hides off of grass-fed animals are always cleaner than those ones from the feedlot. So why don't we have a leather works there? There's a lot of people who will pay premium dollars to have grass-fed bone chews for their dogs. And we can do the same thing with lamb and, get, wool and all that. But the gist of this was, again, going back to being totally local, divorcing ourselves from the global economy. And, it just rolled out from the meat animal products to grains in rotation, so that we can, forgive me, Burke, so that we can distill whiskey, or we can have wine and have, a tourism there. But it built out from grassroots regeneration and direct marketing of meat to rebuilding entire communities. It's one of those things that I wish I had given that talk 100 different times in 100 different places, but I only ever did it twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
That appeals to me, Jim. And a thought that I've had is, perhaps if one farmer or one rancher is not big enough, see who you've got close by in kind of the same general community that you could cooperate with to get enough volume. For example, the cost, you've got to sell meat quite a bit more expensive if you sell your own direct, because of the hide and offal for the big packers pays for most of their
Processing.
expenses. And if you've got to pay to have them killed, cut and wrapped, that's another deal. But if you can do something to diminish those costs by getting a little more volume, a little more contract work done, so if they could pull people together and then work in teams or in groups or whatever, there could be some advantage there too.
Yeah, there was a dog food factory in this project also.
Yeah.
That's where your guts go. Guts and trimmings.
Well, and pet food, organ meats and everything else. There's all kinds of things you can do. And
Well, very good. Well, we're going to wrap this up. We're going to get to hear from Jim next. Burke, we're going to hear from tomorrow. Wally, why don't we give you the last word, because we won't officially hear from you again, but let's wrap this thing up, summarize it, put a bow on it, and then we're going to move into Jim's presentation.
One thing that I would like to say is, going back to what Burke said and everything, the biggest problem we have is an attitude problem in agriculture. And just, Bud Williams' deal was smile and mean it. And that's what I've learned from him. And, just You know, you just got to go do it. And one thing, if people are interested, I am involved with a group called ranching.fyi, and we do marketing schools or simulations, and we have a market pulse every Monday morning at 7:30, 7:30 in the morning, every Monday morning Central Time. Be on there, and it's a subscription website, but if you aren't happy, I'll give your money back, you know.
Yeah.
And also, if
Yep.
somebody was talking about oh man, I have a senior moment. Terrible. Gerald Fry School. We have the only Gerald Fry School on ranching.fyi. So you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was there.
Yeah, you were there.
I was there.
Yeah,
That was
probably
when
after
we
20
first
years
met.
or so, Jared, I probably need to send a release. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Good
Very
for you. I'm glad you.
Like I said, me, ranching is a wonderful place to be, and the people, you know, just like being on here with you guys. I mean, what an honor and stuff. And like I tell everybody, I learned more here today probably than anybody else. You know, just listening and thinking and stuff.
Very cool.
That's it.
Well, Wally, Jim, Burke, thank you very much for being part of this discussion. This has been great. I think this will be one of the highlights that'll go out on YouTube and will be what I hope to be is kind of preserving this immortal knowledge from each of you. You've paid the price to become experts in your field, and I think that's one of our duties and responsibilities with Ag Steward is to, in a way, preserve that and be able to share it with others. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.